Hey Retrospectors, Olly here, your favourite retrospector. We'll be back with a new series next week, and we've got a great selection of Today in History stories for you. I know what's coming up. There are some doozies in there, trust me. But for the next 3 days, we're going to be looking back over the year gone by and handpicking our favourite episodes of 2025. You'll hear Arian's Choice tomorrow. But to kick us off, from the 23rd of April, I've selected our episode, The New Coke Debacle. It documents the whirlwind of cock-ups that accompanied the ill-fated launch of Coca-Cola's new recipe when they were trying to compete with Pepsi in 1985. I was 4 then, and I was in Britain where we never got new Coke. So I never had first-hand experience of this shambles. So it was interesting to read up on it and understand just why it is the perennial example in marketing textbooks about how not to iterate a classic product. It's an episode that's about branding in the commercial world, but also, like so many of our episodes, it's about looking back on the time that it happened in. And 1985, you get a sense, even from these next 10 minutes, was a very different age. After the episode was originally released, listener Matthew Wynn got in touch to say, Retrospectors, I was in my teens when this happened. My mother and I started each day not with a coffee, but with a Coke. Your episode was well researched, but as far as I'm concerned, old Coke never returned to the shelves, and you didn't say that. Coca-Cola Classic is not old Coca-Cola. The ingredients are plainly different. By far the most expensive ingredient in old Coke, in fact the only ingredient of significant expense, was sugar. Coca-Cola Classic, the new product that Coca-Cola passed off as old Coke, has never had that. The only ingredient of significant expense in Classic, since renamed simply Coca-Cola, is high fructose corn syrup. Ergo, it was much cheaper to produce clever Coke. Interesting perspective. Thank you very much, Matthew. I hope that you've switched to coffee every morning now. Otherwise, I'm not sure you'd have made it to your 50s. Anyway, I hope you enjoy hearing the episode again. Here it comes. Everyone else, remember, we will see you on Monday to kick off a whole new year of retrospecting. Or, of course, if you are a Club Retrospectors member, we'll see you on Sunday. Here's the episode.
It's April 23rd, 1985, and another remarkable event is about to be uncovered by Arian, Rebecca, and Olly, the Retrospectors.
So it was today in history in 1985 that Coca-Cola Company chairman and CEO Roberto Goizueta stood before the world's press at New York City's Lincoln Center to unveil a new formula of their famous drink, describing it as smoother, rounder yet bolder, and with a more harmonious flavor. But what he didn't mention, and what the press was quick to pounce on, was that the product that he was launching, later dubbed New Coke, tasted significantly more like Coca-Cola's arch-rival Pepsi.
Yeah, this is the debacle of New Coke. This is like folkloric 1980s mythos hubris, isn't it? Like it's a totemic event in marketing failure that like America's biggest company, basically, Coca-Cola, in a country with a short history. This was a brand coming up to its 100th anniversary, as we discussed in our episode about the origins of Coca-Cola in 1886. This was a product with award-winning advertising, the most instantly recognisable bottle in the world. Astonishingly, they were still the nation's favourite soda. They were in front of Pepsi. The only reason that Pepsi was creeping up on them in the charts of America's favourite soda was because Coca-Cola themselves had split the market with the phenomenal success of Diet Coke. So, if you could go back in time and tell the Coca-Cola executives to chill out, they never would have done this. But as Pepsi executives were quick to point out, they blinked. Like, they had forced Coke into the position where they felt the threat of Pepsi and reacted in this completely absurd way of withdrawing one of the nation's most iconic products from the shelves and replacing it.
Yeah, I mean, technically you're right. Coke was still outselling Pepsi, but that was because it had an iron grip on the vending machine sector and because it was the default cola for McDonald's outlets. When it came to actual supermarket sales, Pepsi had crept ahead. And the reason for that was that it was really dominating the younger market.
The Pepsi generation, if you will.
The Pepsi generation, if you were to call them something. Because as you said, Coke had this decades-long stretch of unrivaled supremacy, but that had made it feel a little bit stale, especially because it was so associated with nostalgic adverts and sort of wholesome all-American imagery. So when you get to sort of countercultural 1970s, that nostalgia factor held a bit less appeal among the younger generation. And Pepsi had really embraced that. You know, in 1983, they partnered with Michael Jackson, who was at the height of his Thriller fame. They paid $5 million for that, the highest that had ever been paid for a celebrity sponsorship. And so there was this notion that Pepsi was a dynamic young person's drink and Coke was sort of left behind in the dust. So, you know, Coke are looking around at what can we do to address this issue? Well, if young people are the ones who are accounting for the difference, what do young people like? They like sweet drinks. So new Coke had to be sweeter than the old Coke, which is in turn what made it taste a little bit more like Pepsi.
Yeah, what wasn't being mentioned at this press conference announcing New Coke was that instead of offering two options, Coca-Cola decided to discontinue its 99-year-old classic formula, which it locked into a vault. The formula was known as Formula 7X, and they put it in this secure Atlanta vault, intending for it never to be released again. Goizueta, on the day, he said, "Some may call this the boldest marketing move in packaged goods history." And Coca-Cola president Donald Keogh doubled down on that exact same sentiment, declaring, "We simply call it the surest move ever made." It's so remarkable in its hubris. He said, "I've never been as confident about a decision as I am about the one we're announcing today."
Yes, and when the press did kind of dig in, when they slowly began to realise in this conference that, wait, hold on a minute, you're taking Coke off the shelves, as to whether they really were as sure as they claimed to be, their justification for it was, yes, we are sure, because it's not us telling you that this tastes better, it's the consumers. And the thing is, that was true. They had spent 4 years creating this thing. They had had 190,000 consumers participating in months of blind taste testing before the new taste was introduced. The problem was, when you make it based on taste at all, that is, of course, playing Pepsi's game. The Pepsi Challenge had been their advertising campaign for 10 years. It was known that Americans in general preferred the taste of Pepsi to Coke, but preferred the brand of Coke to Pepsi. So Coke was number one, not because of taste, but because of brand and legacy. And so, yes, you can make something that tastes better than Pepsi, but that's not why people buy it. You're taking away the reason they buy it, which is it's the thing that's been on the shelves for 100 years.
Yeah, and in retrospect, there was another major warning sign, which is that in the focus group setting, a minority of the participants felt actively negatively about the idea of changing Coke. In that group setting, the attitude of the naysayers tended to dull the general enthusiasm of the group as a whole, but Coke overlooked that because they were focusing on the overall positive reaction and the highly positive individual surveys. But what they were missing was that the world resembles a focus group more than it does an individual taste test. And as you said, Olly, a blind test might tell you that consumers prefer the flavour of a drink in isolation, but real life isn't a blind test. And a consumer is not only tasting the brand when they buy it, but they're also identifying themselves with that brand. And if a brand ends up being associated with being an enormous flop, that is going to impact your enjoyment of the drink and your willingness to be associated with the drink.
When the taste change was announced, some consumers panicked. They filled their basements with cases of Coke before, the old version went off the shelves. A man in San Antonio in Texas apparently drove to a local bottler and bought $1,000 worth of Coca-Cola. And then protest groups such as the Society for the Preservation of the Real Thing and also Old Coca-Cola Drinkers of America, which claim to have recruited 100,000 members in their drive to bring back the old Coke. They began popping up around the country. I mean, this is now the makings of a marketer's dream, of course, because you've got this huge outcry. But in the meantime, people are pissed off. They're angry. Goizueta himself, the CEO, got a letter that had been addressed to Chief Dodo of the Coca-Cola Company, and inside was a complaint. He said that he didn't know what he was more upset about, the fact that someone was sort of sad about losing their favorite product, or the fact that the Postal Service knew to send a thing to him as Chief Dodo.
Gay Mullins, who was the guy who ran Old Cola Drinkers of America, and remember, this is pre-internet, so if you want to get 100,000 followers, you're having people call your phone number in your house. He put $30,000 of his own money into this campaign. He gave an interview to the Washington Post in which he said, "I feel injured betrayed, like a sacred trust has been violated, something torn out of the American fabric. I know people who are going through withdrawal without their Coca-Cola. People are having anxiety headaches. They've been placed in a distressed state. It's the post-Coke syndrome. People are so shocked by this, they worry that maybe the whole country is beginning to fall apart.
Yeah, a psychiatrist who was brought in to listen to calls to the Coke switchboard said some of the customers were using language more commonly associated with the death of a loved one. And the strongest negative reaction was concentrated among drinkers in the South, especially Georgia, who saw Coke and Coca-Cola nostalgia as being part of their regional identity. Then that negativity began to spread, because that's another misconception, is that it was, a half-baked idea, which it wasn't. It had been researched extensively, and that it was an instant flop. But actually, at the very beginning, sales rose.
Oh, everyone wanted to try a new Coke, of course.
Yeah.
79 days after their initial announcement, Coca-Cola executives held another press conference on July the 11th of the same year, and this time they were apologizing. They were announcing the fact that the original formula was coming out of its Atlanta vault, where it had spent almost no time. Don Keogh, who was the COO, said in this mea culpa address that, quote, "Our boss is the consumer. We want them to know we're really sorry." And the news was so big that it actually, television networks interrupted their regular programming with special reports about how Coke was coming back again. This is publicity that you couldn't have bought.
Yeah, and although Pepsi had gone to town, making fun of the whole debacle, Pepsi didn't see any significant rise in sales during the whole thing. Consumers were so focused on how great the old Coke was, which ironically gave Coca-Cola the renewed attention and engagement that it had wanted all along.
Yes, but it is an ironic side product. I mean, there are people who claim that this was somehow masterminded. There is no way in hell that they planned to do this.
And as Keogh himself put it, we're not that dumb and we're not that smart.
Meanwhile, New Coke did stay on sale as Coke 2 until the 90s. I didn't know this because it never came to the UK. But in America, you could buy Coke 2, which they then sort of phased out until Stranger Things Season 3, when there's a scene with New Coke in it, because it's set in 1985, which brought about the re-availability of New Coke in the form of a Stranger Things pack you could buy from the Coke website. So they're kind of leaning in now to the sort of nostalgia around this historic failure of theirs. But, I mean, it could have been, had they not recovered sales, an absolute humiliation of everyone involved.
Yeah. One other person who got humiliated, by the way, was Bill Cosby, who had...
This is the worst thing he did.
Oh, yeah, right. But he'd been a really popular pitch man in the late 70s and early 80s for Coca-Cola. And when New Coke was launched, Cosby himself led the rollout with a series of commercials where he was praising this new formula of the drink. But from the start, it seemed kind of odd because Cosby, up until that point, had been involved in ads that were saying Coke is better than Pepsi because it's not as sweet as Pepsi. And now he was saying, and now there's a new version that's even sweeter and it tastes better than the thing that whatever. And he then actually, as the backlash against him hit, he then had to step down as a pitch person for Coca-Cola, saying that he'd lost all credibility, which is funny, as you say, considering what happened later in his career.
Yes, yeah. He never did anything weird with drinks again.
Nope.
Tomorrow.
It's so loud in the cabin, you can't hear any music and you can't speak. It rains on you.
Ditch the ads and get a Sunday episode when you join Club Retrospectors. Patreon.com/Retrospectors.